Hi, this is Brian with Prophetless Media and Post, and today we're going to take a look at one way to do screen replacement inside DaVinci Resolve Fusion. If you'd like to follow along, I'll put a link down below to the clip that we're using so you can download the clip. So let's take a look at our clip. First off, we're going to have to track the phone for our screen replacement. We're also going to have to key it and retain the reflections. And the other thing we're going to need to do is do an animation for our screen replacement because there is interaction with the screen. So quite a few different things we're going to have to do. So the first thing we should do is let's track the phone. I'm going to add in a planar tracker and let's connect up to the planar tracker. And now if we look through, let's set up our shape. And now we know that the thumb kind of moves across, and this may or may not be a big deal with the planar tracker, but just in case, I am going to make my shape around the edges of the phone. We're just outside of the edge, and then I'm going to occlude the area where his finger is moving through the screen. So I'm just going to go like this. So something like that. And the shape can be a little loose. It can come out a little bit beyond. So I think that shape's going to work. Over in the planar tracker, the tracking type, I'm going to change it to hybrid point for this one. I think it might do a better job. And with those things set, let's just track through and see what we get. Okay, great. That looks like a decent track. So I'm going to go back to the first frame. So the way we're going to set this up is we're going to use the corner pin option inside the planar tracker to place our screen below the original clip, and we'll use a delta keyer to key out so we can see through to the screen replacement. Let's set this up real quick. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here. You can see right here, this whole thing right here is the screen replacement, and I'll go over that in a second once we set up this the basics of the comp. We're going to bring our screen replacement into the corner pin input of the planar tracker, and inside the operation mode, let's change it from track to corner pin. And we don't want this to be merged over like this. We don't want to actually do the merge inside the planar tracker. So instead of foreground over background, we want foreground only. So we only want this image. And now let's add in a merge. And we want this image from our planar tracker to go into the background of the merge and our main clip into the foreground, and then the merge out to the media out. So let's bring that like this. And what we want to be able to do, so if we look at the merge, we can see there's nothing going on, and that's because we need a key. So let's add the delta keyer. Not there. Holding shift, we can connect it up here. And let's just do a quick key. So I'm going to grab our background color, and I'm going to grab maybe somewhere down in here so you can see the reflections. So something like this. Okay, and that's just a rough key. Now that we have a basic setup, now let's place the card. So we just use the corner pin to place the card. We'll zoom in here, and we want it to be just a little bit over the edge. So as we refine the key, and we'll just try to get the perspective correct. Maybe something like that. We can always adjust this later. Okay. So this is the basics of our comp. Let me go over what I did with the screen replacement. Okay, so if we come over to all of this is the screen replacement. And what I did is, let me just set this to fit. So with each one of these, what I did was I took a screen grab of my own phone. So I have a bunch of them. And each screen grab, I moved down about 2/3 of the way so that I have overlap of each image. So you can see on this one here, I have a little bit of this image. And then my next screen grab, I still have enough of that. And with each one of these, I did a crop. So if we take a look at it, we had this here, and this right here at the top and the bottom is static. So I just cropped those off, and I did that with each one. So I did this one, cropped it off, and this one, and cropped it off. Then I added all these transforms after each one, which is what I'm going to use to line them all up and merge them all together. Now, if I look through this merge, I can't even see the other ones. So the way I set this up is I used a crop after all these merges. And in the crop, if we look at the crop, all I did was make this extra large. So I did something like this. So I had plenty of room, and I just moved around these transforms. You can see each one until they lined up correctly. So each one of these has a transform, and just moved them so we have this one big long image that we can use to scroll with the interactions in the phone. Once I was done lining these up, that's when I took the crop and I cropped it in tight to the image. So we have nothing outside of it. And then just to finish this off, I took one of the images, and it could have been any one of these images, and I wanted this static bar at the bottom. So I brought that back around. I used this little bit of a crop because there was an edge that was showing through. So I did a crop here. You can see it's just very little. Just cropped in about 5 pixels. Use that into the background of this merge. The reason I put this into the background was because it will set the image size. So if I did it the other way around, if I swapped inputs, you can see this is, we don't want this going into the planar tracker because it'll be all messed up. So I did it the other way. So I did that, brought that in the background, and then I used this rectangle, zoom in here, to cut out the area where I wanted the foreground to come through. So this, the rest of this. And then that way, as I transform this image, this bar will stay static, and then the images here will roll through like it does on your phone. So that's the basics of how I set that up. Then I used a transform. Let's undo that. And looking through our final comp, let's look through our rough comp here. And all I did was, you can see all these keyframes here. So what I did was I went to frame 25 is right when he first puts this finger down on the phone and he starts to scroll up, and I kind of match that animation a little bit using the image on the phone, and then he flicks it. And so I added another keyframe here to add that kind of animation. Now he picks his finger up. And so from frame 57 to about 89, these two keyframes are exactly the same. So if we look at let's look at the controls. You can see it's 465186, and then I just made another keyframe here. This is right when he puts his finger back down on the phone, and then he starts to move the screen just a little bit. And so I just, using the screen, I just kind of match that move of his finger as he goes through. And so that's what these keyframes are, is just to kind of follow along. And around 160, he starts to move his finger off, but he kind of rubs the phone. So I added this extra keyframe just to give it a little bit of animation. And that's what this animation is here. So just a little bit more movement, just to kind of match what it might look like in reality. After I did all these keyframes, the one thing I did do is I went into the spline editor. If we open that up and let's zoom in on the keyframe where he flicked. So he goes here and then he flicks it up. Instead of it ending abruptly, I took this keyframe here and I just I moved this just to soften it. I also took the 3 keys, this one, and this one. So after he puts his finger down the second time and starts to move, I smoothed just these 3 keyframes. And that's all I did for the animation. Okay. Then we come down here to a frame 185. He actually clicks the phone. So it would be like he's clicking that video. So I did an animated piece to change the screen. And that's what this is. So let's open that up. And the way I did this is just this media piece. Added a transform and then merged it over the top of this image. So this is what it looks like when you finally go through. And the way I'd set this up is looking through the final comp. I knew 185 was where he clicked on the screen. So I went, maybe 5 keyframes would be enough for the animation. So I went to frame 190 under controls and set a keyframe for the full size of the image. Then I went back 5 frames to where he clicks. And I brought the size to 0 and I offset the center a little bit, just so it looks like the animation is coming from where he clicks. Then he clicks and then it just zooms in. The other thing I did was on both of these transforms, because there's animation, I turned on motion blur. So we went over to settings, turn on motion blur. Right now I have the quality at 4, which may or may not be enough. So we'll see what it looks like at the end. And so for the final render, we might need to bump these up. Anyway, okay, so that's everything with the animation of the screen. So let's get back to our key. Okay, so let's go back. I'm just going to go back to first frame. Let's just fit this up. So let's take a look at our initial key. And I'm going to turn on the alpha and just kind of see what we got going on here. So the first thing I noticed as we take a look at this, well, there's 2 things. First of all, there's a whole bunch of noise around here. And I don't know if you can see this on the video, but there's definitely a bunch of noise around here. Well, luckily, since we're using the planar tracker and we're only using the foreground only, if we take a look at the planar tracker, we actually have this alpha. So we can use this we can invert this mask and block out almost everything except for the screen. That's going to help with our key. So why don't we do that? So I'm going to take our planar tracker and right from here, I'm going to bring this into our solid mat. And let's look at the delta keyer. Inside the delta keyer, go to mask and under solid mat, let's invert that. And there we go. Now I got rid of all of that noise. So we're just focused on the phone. And the next thing I noticed is if we look closely at the mat, you can see all this pixelization, which is terrible for keying. So one of the things I'd like to do is actually use something like a noise reduction to smooth this out to get the key. But I don't want to alter our original footage. I don't want the original footage to be touched really at all, other than what effect we're going to do. And in order to do this, I want to use a noise reduction just for the keying, and then I'm going to add that mat back into our original clip and pre-multiply it. Let's set that up. So I'm going to add in a noise reduction, and I don't want it there. Let's shift and drop it in here. And that noise reduction, let's go to temporal. Let's change that to better. Let's pump that up to 10. And under spatial, let's go to better, and then maybe up to 20. Okay, so now you can see the difference. If we zoom right in here, you can see that's much smoother, and that's going to help with our key. So now let's set up the rest of this. So the way we want this to work is we're going to unhook the delta keyer, bring this down here, and then we're going to use a mat control. We're going to grab our original clip. So whoops, let's not look at the alpha. There. We want our original clip. We're going to put that into the background. We're going to bring our delta keyer into the foreground. And if we look through the mat control, we're going to change it to combine alpha. That's going to bring our alpha down from the delta keyer. And then we want to post multiply. And there we have our key. And we want that mat control to go into our merge. So if we look here now we have this. So as you may have noticed, now we can see all that green spill. So let's take care of that. Under the mat control, let's go to spill. And it's green. Let's bring the suppression up. And then let's go to well done. Might be able to get away with medium, but I'm going to leave it at well done for now. This is our basic setup for our comp. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this key. And I'm going to press on key again. And while we're looking through the merge, so we can see our full comp, I'm going to actually grab this background and see if I can get a better edge. You can move it around. You can see what happens as you move it around. You can change the way the key looks. I think we're actually in a pretty good place where we were because we can see all these reflections. That's good. Okay, so we got the reflections, but this edge right here is terrible. So let's see, there's a couple different things that we could do. Let's try using the matte, and we can use the erode, dilate, and blur to try to clean up this edge. So this is one way you could do it. You can see it was just a little bit right there. Now that's gone. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Yeah, that looks pretty nice. Except when I did that, we ate away too much of the thumb. So I want to bring back some of that information. So one thing we could do is just make a roto shape around where the thumb is and use that to do a secondary key just for the thumb. So I already did a mask. Let me just set this up a little bit. We need a little bit more room. So I did this magic mask earlier. Let me just drop this in. Let's take a look. You can see all I did was make this one stroke, and then I tracked it right through. So I have this mat, and I'm just going to expand this mat out just so it's isolating the thumb. So I'm going to do that by, let me get a little bit more room. I'm going to add a mat control, and we'll connect that up to the mat control. And if we look at the mat control, turn it to alpha, we're going to blur it a little bit and expand it out. And this should give us enough, something like that, just to give us enough room to make a nice key for the edge. So we're going to use this mat similar to like what we did in this delta keyer. So let's add in a delta keyer. We'll connect our footage here, and then we're going to take this mat that we just made for the finger and drop it into the garbage mat, which is kind of like the grayish input. Okay, so that's just the opposite. So in the delta keyer, let's go to mask, and under garbage mat, hit invert. We're just going to pull a key just for this edge. So let's look at that delta keyer, and under the key, let's come in here and let's grab that and just kind of, we can start with that and we'll take a look and see how that all works out. So to merge these together, we can need another mat control. So I'm going to drop that in. So we have this delta keyer going in the background, this one into the foreground. Inside this mat control, we're going to change it to combine alpha, and then instead of copy, maximum. And that's going to merge them both together. You can see that we have, looks like a pretty nice key. And then we can look at the final merge. And now you can see the difference from what we just did. Let's take all of this second key, holding Command P, you can see the difference. We just brought back a lot more of the edge. Now it's not perfect. I still feel like there's that little bit of edge here could be better. So let's see what we can do about that in the delta keyer. So another way that we can mess with the edges within the delta keyer is using the gain and balance. So if we look at this closely, we can kind of just mess around with these gains and the balance. And you can see what's happening. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but we're eating away at this edge a little bit. And just kind of mess around with these and see if we can get a decent looking edge. Actually, why don't another thing we can do is since we have this set up, let me grab the keyer and see. Okay, something like that might work. We'll take a look at it. So let's see what the difference is. Yeah, that just brings back more of that edge, I think. There we go. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I think that the key looks pretty good. Now let's see if we can finish this off a little bit more. One thing I'd like to do is let's go back to the first screen. Let's add a little bit. So this is a little too sharp. So I'm going to add in a little bit of a blur right before the planar tracker. And maybe something like 1.4. And then let's also add a color correct, because I want that to be a little bit brighter. Maybe something like 1.1. So it's just a little bit brighter. And I just want to check this a little bit. Something's happening there. Oh, we have to readjust our planar tracker. Okay, the perspective looks pretty good. Last couple things we'll need to do is before we render and check where we are, let's in the planar tracker, let's turn on the motion blur for the planar tracker. So some of that natural motion from the phone moving will be added. And the last thing I would do is if we look real close, you can see that there's like a grain here. We should add in some grain on this phone. So let's add in a film grain. Okay, and then we'll see if we can try to match this up. Yeah, I mean, that looks pretty good right there. Something like that. And then, you know, we can always tweak these after the fact. We've done a lot of work here, and this is a good time to probably render it and check our work to see if we have any other problems. So let me just do a quick double check. I know I want these transforms to have the motion blur on. So these two transforms, we also want to make sure that the planar tracker has the motion blur on. We have our film grain. I'll just take another look at the key. Okay, that's looking pretty good. All right, so I'm going to render this out, and we'll take a look at it and see if we have to do anything else. Okay. Okay, our render is done, and let's play it through and see what we got. That took several minutes to render because of all the motion blur. Okay, so we got some really nice reflection. The key looks really good. One thing I noticed is that maybe the aspect ratio of this, because we used the corner pin, could be changed. So maybe we could do that because right here, this looks a little stretched. But other than that, I think that this looks pretty good. So that's really the basics of doing screen replacement in DaVinci Resolve Fusion. Again, if you have any issues or questions, feel free to reach out in the comments. I'm usually pretty good about responding to everyone. I try my best. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.